how to improve your communication in English. Over the last few days, I received quite a number of suggestions to make a video on this topic. Now, a lot of you watching this might want to write better emails at work, give a presentation confidently, or at least order food in English at a premium restaurant. So in this video, I have shared the exact method I followed over these years on how I became fluent in English, and I have also backed it up with a bit of research and science. So let's get into segment number 1, reframing the goal. To be honest, the very title of this video is wrong because developing communication skills should not even be our goal. Our goal is to be good with languages overall. No, this is not a wordplay. There is a difference between both. Let's say, if you are good with numbers, you will be naturally good with analytics. In the same way, if you get good with the language, communication in that language automatically becomes good. Language is the base on which communication as a skill is built. So until you become good with the language, you cannot communicate properly. If you think my communication is good, then I have to tell you, I never focused and made an effort even once that I will be a good communicator one day. My focus has always been on improving my target language, in this case English. When my English became reasonably good, my communication also became good. It had to. It's that obvious. So hereafter in this video, I will not be focusing on building communication skills per se. Rather, the video will be a master class on how you can be good with English as a language overall. The best part is, the model I am going to share with you, you can use this for mastering any other language. It just works fine. The formula, the fastest way to master English. It's so obvious and simple that there is no point in keeping it a secret till the end. Here it is. If you want to get fluent in English, give yourself 300 hours. In those 300 hours, you do nothing but watch English TV shows and read English books. That's it. That's the secret recipe. If you are looking for some other groundbreaking ideas, I would say you are complicating the process. No, you don't have to buy that grammar book. You don't have to pay costly money and attend a boot camp, or you don't have to install that language learning app and keep maintaining streaks. For a lot of goals in life, an active approach is required. For example, if you have to get to 15% body fat, then you have to actively work out, actively be on a diet, and actively plan your recovery. But with respect to building language skills, the best and stress-free approach is to get relaxed and stay passive as much as possible. Your approach to building a great base in English should exactly be like how you mastered your mother tongue. To speak your mother tongue, you did not go for spoken classes or 30-day programs or buy that subscription plan in that cool app. You were born and simply you lived in an environment where the language was spoken 24/7. You constantly heard the words from your parents, neighbors, and relatives, and eventually one day you ended up speaking the language on your own. Of course, you made a lot of mistakes in the beginning, but eventually, with considerable trial and error, you reached near perfection in your mother tongue. For a large part, mastering your mother tongue was a passive approach. This is the same approach we are going to do now with slight modifications here and there. When it comes to language learning, a lot of people make the mistake of starting from a grammar book. Remember, you did not learn your mother tongue. You acquired your mother tongue. You never had one bit of frustration and disappointment while mastering your mother tongue. So, what if you do the same process for every additional language you are going to acquire? If you break down language learning down to its simplest form, it's nothing but management of input and output of words. And there are two forms of inputs, which are listening and reading, and there are two forms of outputs, which are speaking and writing. When we were kids, all we had was the only input in the form of listening. It's quite ironic that we learned to read and write our mother tongue after we became fluent in speaking that language. So it is possible to get the same result without needing to learn grammar or solve any tough workbook with 500 exercises. I won't say trying to learn a language through grammar books or some workbooks is a waste of time, but they should be like your step number 27 in language learning, definitely not step number 1 or step number 2. So in the early days, we will only be focusing on building an environment where it is conducive for us to take as much input as possible in English. Now that leads us to the most important segment of this video, comprehensible input. There is a beautiful method to master any language without stress, and that method is called comprehensible input. The famous linguist Stephen Krashen came up with this method and theory. Comprehensible input means exposing yourself to the multiple forms of inputs in English in a way you can reasonably understand. This means becoming like our 2-year-old self. We need to expose ourselves to an environment where there is only English almost everywhere. The most important part is not any English but understandable English. That means not trying to read Shakespeare on day one, but reading a material which you can understand easily but also slightly above your comfort level. Like I said, all you have to do is give yourself roughly 300 hours, that's roughly 90 minutes a day for the next 6 months. At that time, focus only on giving inputs in the English language. You can be as passive as possible in this. You don't have to make notes or you don't have to build a word bank. All you have to do is passively consume. My claim here is that no matter where your current level in English is, by the time you cross 300 hours in getting comprehensible inputs, you can't help but get fluent. By the way, this 90 minutes per day is not something you have to carve out extra from your normal schedule. This plan is already integrated into your daily life. Now let's see what are those different forms of inputs and how to spend those 90 minutes per day. The two forms of input I use are visual and text. Normally, if someone asks me how to get the maximum amount of language input in the minimum amount of time, I would say reading would be the best choice for that. Personally, reading has always been a part of my life. There was never a day in my life, to my remembrance, that I spent without reading. It can be either newspapers, magazines, or books. In my English journey, a larger amount of language acquisition came through reading books and newspapers, and then to some extent through watching TV shows. But many of you watching this might not have an inclination towards reading, and that's okay. You can develop reading habits slowly over time. As of now, you can start the inputting process through the visual medium. Input in the form of visual. We all spend time watching movies and TV series every day. Media consumption is already a part of our life. Now, what I suggest is, for the next 6 months, instead of watching TV shows and movies in your home language, I recommend you watch only English TV shows and movies. See, I already excused you from attending classes or reading grammar books. So this one you have to do. Between TV shows and movies, I would prefer TV shows because most English TV shows are shot in a studio, there would be less action and the dialogues would be clear. So you have all the more reasons to focus on the words they speak and you are less likely to be diverted by the action. And among the TV shows, I would recommend sitcoms rather than thrillers and suspense. Because again, sitcoms have more dialogues than thrillers and they generally are 20 to 25 minutes long and every episode would be a standalone. So you won't have the compulsion to binge watch the next episode and the next episode and spend a whole lot of time. The TV shows I would recommend are The Office, Seinfeld, The Simpsons, Everybody Loves Raymond, and The Goldbergs. Like I said, they all are studio-based shows, dialogue intensive, and every episode is just 20 to 25 minutes long. In case you don't have an OTT subscription, then I would recommend a couple of YouTube channels where the content they produce can act as a great source of English input. One is Smarter Everyday, and the other one is Learn English with TV series. I recommend these two channels because their videos are 20 to 30 minutes long on average. They have such engaging content and most importantly, their videos have English subtitles. Now let us look at the other form of input. If you are open to reading in English or if you already have a reading habit, then that would be great. You can expedite your language fluency much faster. Also, this form of input will help you in formal communication like writing an email or giving a presentation. But if you don't have a reading habit or if you are a bit averse to reading, you can start by watching TV shows or videos and maybe a month later, you can slowly start with the reading habit. But anyway, you need to have reading as an input to build fluency. Okay, so what type of materials should you be reading? In my childhood, I wanted to become a civil servant. So I used to read newspapers a lot. Even though they were beyond my level of understanding, I read English newspapers because I was curious about staying updated on current affairs. But over the last 10 years, I got so allergic towards news that I don't even read newspapers these days. Now, what I read the most are books on productivity, history, philosophy, investing, and behavioral economics. So I read a lot of books on those topics as of now. So my answer is that you read what interests you the most. But if you are an absolute beginner, then I would say you can start reading non-fiction books. I won't recommend fiction books in the early days because the language used in fiction books is quite advanced and you might not be able to get that sense of momentum initially, and soon you might feel discouraged and you would discontinue reading altogether. Remember, listening builds overall fluency, but reading is what adds maturity to your language. You learn way more words through reading than through listening. So, regarding non-fiction books, I would suggest you start with books like The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, The Miracle Morning, Ikigai, and The Compound Effect. These are all small books to start with. The language used in those books is also quite simple, and even if you read at a slower speed, you can finish reading these books in about 4 to 5 hours. Some important points to keep in mind. Now, the most important thing I would like to say is the amount of repetition you go through each and every learning resource, be it a TV show episode or the book you are reading. In your first round, you would hardly figure out anything. You would probably learn like 10% at your best in the first round. So instead of hunting for the new TV episode or the new book, I would say go through the same book or the same episode at least 3 times with 2 to 3 days gap in between each time. Even at my level, I try to read every book at least 3 times. If I try to read any book less than 3 times, I won't be giving the author enough chances to convey what he or she tries to say. Almost in every book, every extra time I read them, I would be able to find one new thing or get one new insight. For some books, by the time I read the 3rd or the 4th time, a whole new dimension would start to unfold. My entire perspective about that book would change. It may feel like you are losing the chance of reading more books by rereading the same book again and again, but take it from me, for language learning, rereading will do wonders. The next thing to keep in mind is, when you are reading, if you don't understand the meaning of a word, don't try to look at the dictionary immediately. Try learning through context. For example, read this. Stuart is a considerate man, but today he had to shout at his kids out of anger. Now, when you read that, let's say you didn't know the meaning of the word considerate. But when you read it along with the next sentence, you can infer that normally Stuart doesn't shout out of anger. Despite that, today he happened to shout at his kids because maybe the kids irritated him or they threw a tantrum. So we can understand that Stuart shouting out of anger is a rare event. That way we can also infer indirectly that he is normally a kind and thoughtful person. So when we say a person is considerate, that means we are referring to a person who is kind and thoughtful. This is context-based learning. Every time you encounter a new word, just try to read the entire sentence along with the previous sentence or the next sentence, and you will be able to figure out the meaning more often. If you keep referring to the dictionary every now and then, that will slow down your momentum and you will not like the process eventually. And lastly, after you are done with exposing yourself to this language for 300 hours passively but with full attention, you should be able to talk to other people and have normal conversations in English. And after that, if you are still aiming for perfection or expertise, then you can start doing active learning. By this, I mean studying grammar books, attending boot camps, or hiring professional tutors to teach you one-on-one. Remember, deliberate learning comes much later when it comes to language. So that leads us to the final segment of this video. How do you stop translating in your head? In the early days of your language learning journey, when you read a sentence, you have to translate it word for word in your head to understand the meaning. And when you need to reply, even that time, you have to translate word for word in your head and give a slow and stuttered answer. But as you keep learning the language, the more exposure you get to it, you eventually reach a point of automaticity. Suddenly, when somebody says something in English to you, you don't have to translate it to your mother tongue. Instead, you understand the sentence in English itself. And even to reply, you will directly shoot the answer in English, again without the need for translation. How does this happen? Our brain is a wonderful pattern machine. Its very nature is to keep seeking patterns around our life, and if the brain notices recurring patterns are happening, it will compile them into a small entity called chunks. The more chunks the brain compiles, the more skilled we become in that particular area. Chunks are like cache files your brain prepares and stores them for ready retrieval later when the need arises. Suppose I ask you what is 15% of 60,000, you would immediately say 9,000, right? But what if we ask the same question to a 7-year-old? The kid is surely going to take a while, right? We say it in a matter of 2 to 3 seconds because we have done enough mental arithmetics for quite some time in our life. Because of that, our brain has formed enough mathematical chunks. So every time in the future you try to do mental calculations, your brain is going to use those chunks to shortcut the processing time. However, the 7-year-old would not have formed enough chunks in his or her brain in the area of mathematical calculations. So the kid would need a pen or paper and at least 1 minute of conscious effort to come up with the right answer. This same chunking process happens when we try to learn how to drive, how to hit a cricket ball, how to cook, how to draw, and so on. In any walk of life where we want to move from deliberateness to automaticity, that will happen only when we form enough brain chunks. And your brain will form chunks only when there is adequate repetition. Now this is the reason why I say the fastest way to master any language is through repeated comprehensible input. I hope you found value in this video. If you found this video to be useful, you can like the video, share with your friends, and most importantly, give me your feedback in the comment section and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you and bye bye.